Hi everyone, and here we are in our next class. And so we are now covering chapter 5. So last week we set up our discussion of ancient Greece and some of the literature, well, in fact, a lot of the literature. And we're having good discussions about the Iliad. And then some of the philosophers and Greek plays and all kinds of great stuff. So now in chapter 5, which begins on page 113 in your book, we are talking about still ancient Greece and the classical style. And this has to do with art and architecture of ancient Greece from approximately the years 700 to 30 BCE. And there is so much to say about this chapter. All right, so let's begin on page 115. And 115 has a sculpture, and it is by Polykleitos, and it is, the Greek name is Doraphoros, and but it means spear bearer. Okay, so you need your books so that you can see this as we talk about it, because it will make a whole lot more sense. All right, so we've come from seeing things in a composite pose, figures particularly in ancient Mesopotamia, ancient Egypt. Now we are going to see figures that are in a more natural pose, as you would be if you were standing, rather than being totally rigid and straight up and down with just 1 foot ahead or something like that. This is because the ancient Greeks so cherished and admired the human form. And the reason they did that is because, they believed that the gods had created humans. And of course, the gods and goddesses themselves are pictured in human form. But the human body was to be celebrated. And it was if you kept your body fit, that was a way of praising the gods for this human form, this human body. And so we see, as for instance, in this with the spear bearer, he is showing himself in what is known as the contrapposto pose. And I'm looking here to see if that is that particular term. I know it's mentioned, I just wanted to see where it's mentioned. Well, I don't see it right offhand, but it is an Italian term that was used during the Renaissance period, which is a rebirth of these classical designs and values. But it actually means a counterpose. So since we're in ancient Greece, let's just call it a counterpose. But it is referred to as contrapposto, which is the Italian term for, guess what? You got it, counterpose. So he has one leg that is very, very straight, and it is holding the weight of the body. And then the other leg, the knee is bent, the foot is not solidly on the floor, just the toes are. And so the body is being balanced. And when that happens, you have one hip that comes slightly out, and then your shoulders then slightly go the other way, so that you're balancing yourself in this counter pose. And it looks much more realistic than, think back to our, pharaohs and their statuary. Everybody looks so, the pose is not very natural. The Greeks wanted it to be as natural as possible because they so valued the body and how it worked and how it was formed. And so you'll also see a lot of attention to detail regarding the muscles and even the veins in the arms. Look at the arm that's down, and you can see, the veins going up the wrist and up into, his arm like this. I mean, they pay great attention to detail. The body particularly. The face at this time, not so much. It's more of an idealized face. I mean, it looks like a face. It looks like, a kind of the features in the face are something that the Greeks admired, but it doesn't necessarily look like a person, a personality. But that's not what they were interested in. They were interested in the body and how it was portrayed. And it was always portrayed as being fit and healthy and strong and young. It's not until we get to the Greek period, we call it the Hellenistic period, which is when the Greek glory days had passed, and now we are starting to fade, and we're starting to see the Roman Empire come on the scene. Now remember, the Greeks were not an empire. They were a group of loosely held city-states, Athens being one of the most important, but by no means the only important Greek city. But Athens was the main one. And so their values were very different. They were interested in, being a good keeper of their cities, but also keeper of their bodies, because that represented this marvelous gift that the gods had bestowed upon them. All right. So now he is a marble statue, which you'll notice your book says a Roman copy after a bronze Greek original. All right. The Romans loved Greek work. They loved their vases, they loved their statuary, and thank goodness the statuary they copied in marble form, whereas the Greeks were creating these statues, not always, but a lot of times in bronze. Now, when you pour bronze into a form, it fills it up, and it's solid all the way through, very uniform. When you carve a living rock, it is not uniform through and through because it's a living rock. So there are going to be little air bubbles and little veins, within the stone. And so it can't, it's dangerous, let's put it that way, to have it standing on its own. The bronze can stand on its own because you can work the figures so that it can balance, because it's through and through, it's uniform. Marble, not so much. So you notice that up against his leg there, the leg that's holding the weight, you have like the stump of a tree. That is a very common way to provide support, where in the original bronze, there wouldn't have needed to be a stump of a tree. But because it is a copy and it's in marble, there is a stump of a tree. Also, if you look very closely, you can see the arm that's down. You will see a strut. It's a rectangular piece of marble that they have left there because had they not done that, it would be easy for the arm to be broken off. And even when they did provide struts to marble copies, sometimes, appendages get broken off. And that's why the ancient Egyptians did not have their arms and legs out. Their arms and legs are close in to their bodies because they're less vulnerable to breakage. And because, why did the ancient Egyptians have these statues done of them? Yes, because they were their Ka statues, and this is a place for their soul to jump in case their bodies were damaged in any way. They're mummies. The Romans, this is not at all what they're doing. It has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with glorifying the human form, particularly the male form, because our friend Aristotle wrote about the female form, and he he believed that the female form was actually the female was a malformed male. Now, this is what he said. This is not what I'm saying. This is what he said. And so they didn't create statuary of female nudes until later. It was always male nudes, and it was because that was the perfect form. The female body was not the perfect form. It was literally, Aristotle believed that when the pregnant woman did not get enough heat to her baby, that the baby didn't form right, and you got a girl. Yeah. Okay, and so when the woman did have enough heat generated in her body, then she would have had a male baby. And that's the form. That's the form that you should, that's the perfect human form. All right. So this is very famous. He was in the arm that's up, like this. He was holding a spear. It was probably made, we're not sure what it was made of. It could have been made of wood. It could have been made of gilded wood. It could have been made of some type of metal, but it has long since disappeared, so we don't have it. That's why it's called the spear bearer, because he would have been holding a spear there. All right, so he's very important. He's very indicative of the artistic representations of humans and gods, because gods were depicted, as humans. So he is very important because this is one of the first times that we see this counter pose, which makes the statues look more realistic. So Polyclitus, we actually have his name. Now, if you turn the page, you will see a group of vases. And the one I want to talk about is the one on page 117, figure 5.5, and that was created by Exekias. So we start having artists signing their works. We didn't have that before. Now we're starting to have artists signing their works, so we know the people who created these things, and because of that, we have a little bit of an idea of the popular ones because we see more of their works. Makes sense? So this one is an example of a black figure, amphora, and it has Achilles and Ajax playing dice, and it was created around the year 530 BCE, and it's about 2 feet tall. And I think last time we talked about, that all the vases have names, like crater was for the wine and the water mixture. Amphoras were a little larger. They could be used for water, they could be used for wine, they could be used for grain. But this particular shape is an amphora shape. Now, black figure means that you have a black background with then some areas of it. Look, it's referred to as red, but it looks a little orangey to us, and the figures are actually black. So that's a black figure vase. If the figures, instead of being black, the background was black and the figures were that orangey color, which they call red, then it would be a red figure vase. And the Greeks really perfected this style, the way that they had to fire the ceramics and the slips and all of that. It was quite a technique, and not just anybody could do it. And the Greeks became very famous for their vases, and if you go to museums around the world today, you can find shelves and shelves and shelves of Greek vases from these periods of time, which means they must have created thousands and thousands of these things for us to have so many today. They're very popular. Sometimes they were used to mark a grave, and they would put a hole at the bottom of the vase, and then they would, when they would go to visit the person's grave, they would pour wine or something as a offering honor. Some were used as trophies in athletic competitions, which, athletic competitions was huge in Greece, and you read a little bit about that in the last chapter with the Olympic Games. So they had various uses, and they were extremely popular, and they were shipped outside of Greece. So we find them all over the place in what is today Italy. So yeah, of course, when I went to Greece, museums have many, many, many Greek vases. But I went to the British Museum in London, and there's just room after room of Greek vases. What's it? Hearst Castle in Northern California. A very wealthy man who owned many newspapers and publications around the early 20th century. He has his library, and they're all along the top of the walls, which this is a huge room. All along the top of the walls are all these Greek vases that he purchased, I guess. So, I mean, there's millions of them. So that meant that they were made a lot. And so this one particularly, the composition, see how it just perfectly fits that curve of the amphora, that curve of the lines. So you have Ajax and Achilles, which are part of the Trojan War story. And they are like taking time out, and they're playing this dice game. And Execheus has done this beautiful job in repeating the curve of the vase and the curve of their back. It's wonderful. The whole composition is fantastic, and you will find this particular vase by Execheus mentioned in any textbook that has anything to do with ancient Greece. It always shows up, as does the Spear Bearer by Polyclitus. Those are two classic pieces. Okay, so then we have kind of like how we got to the Spear Bearer. So you look at the evolution of Greek statuary, and that's on page 119. It even gives you on page 118 a comparison of an ancient Egyptian statue, which would have been a cause statue, versus a very early Greek statue. So you can see how, started out very close and everything was into the body, and then slowly things start to change. All right, and fantastic example of a bronze figure here. Beautiful on page 120. We're not sure if this is Zeus or Poseidon, but we believe it's one of the gods. And I mean, this is an original bronze, and this shows you how the original bronzes could balance. And there's no struts, because this was balanced because it was they poured that bronze in, and it was consistent through and through. So you can have these figures with these arms out and the legs out, and beautiful, magnificent. We're not sure if the figure, because he has this one like his arm like this, and we're not sure if he was throwing, either there would have been a thunderbolt if it was Zeus, or it would have been a trident, which is that funny kind of sword that you see in anything relating to Neptune, which is the Roman name for Poseidon. I know this is a weird example, but I mean, if you've watched The Little Mermaid, you know that her dad always has this trident, which is this kind of pitchforky looking thing. Anyway, so we're not sure what he was holding, which would tell us who this is supposed to be. But again, we have this, beautiful form, very muscular, very strong. He is a little over life size at 6 feet 10 inches. So fabulous. And we're so lucky to have, because this is what we would have had the spear bearer like this. We would have had all these Greek statues that have been made into marble copies by the Romans, if we'd had the original. So what happened to the original? Where are they? Well, over the years, people can not appreciate what the people before them had done, and so most of these things would have been melted down. Yeah, unbelievable. But anyway, most of them would have been melted down and used for like cannonballs, things like that. So yes. Oh, so just one more that I want to mention is on page 121. This is by Praxiteles. Now, the original was by Praxiteles. We don't know who created the Roman marble copy, because again, we don't have the bronze original. She created quite a sensation. This is Aphrodite of Knidos. Knidos was a island, one of the Greek islands, and she was actually commissioned by another town, and they rejected her. And so Knidos comes forward and says, we'll be happy to take this Aphrodite, which is in Rome, she's called Venus. And so what's unusual about her? Well, she's a woman and she's nude. And she's a goddess, which we haven't seen. We haven't seen that, because remember, women's bodies, not so great. So here she is, and she is getting, I think she's getting out of her bath. I don't think she's going into her bath. But either way. So we know she's a Roman copy because look at that huge strut going into her hip. So that's holding her, helping to hold her there. She is in a pose of, somewhat a modest pose. Supposedly the original was just amazing. Her facial features, people that, there were actually people who traveled and, went on trips like we do today, and they described visiting this Venus. It was one of the first times a goddess had been portrayed in the nude, and so she was a big deal, and she was a huge tourist draw for Knidos, which I bet the other place was really angry at themselves for not accepting this statue. But anyway, so she was, the one in Knidos was originally bronze. And so she would have been more like, the Zeus or Poseidon we see across on the other page. So much more realistic. But she's not bad, and she is standing, notice she is standing in the counter pose, and her facial features are stylized, but people really loved these facial features, and they would have been even more realistic. And people described her eyes as being so seductive, and so we start to see here in the mid 300s BCE, we start to see where we have women being depicted, specifically a goddess being depicted nude, as well as we've been having the male nudes. So we're going to end there for this week. Next week, we are going to talk about the buildings, and the building we are going to be talking about is the Parthenon, which you can get a sneak peek on page 122. This is probably the most important, most famous Greek building in the world. And so we're going to be talking about that. But for right now, just look these pages over again, and be sure and take notes of things. Not take notes, because you're doing this in the book. You don't have to take notes, but just highlight things you think are of importance, and that will help you on the next exam. So that is pages 114 to 121. So enjoy, and I will see you next time. Bye.